Hey there YouTube, Far North Racing here. Today we're going to take a bunch of these aluminum mandrel bends and we're going to fabricate them into a replacement pipe for this turbo outlet pipe. So our next big step for the Stealth is to pull the motor out. I've actually got it 3/4 of the way out, but what I don't have yet is a crane. And I'm waiting for it to come on sale at Canadian Tire. So in the meantime, we're going to move this project along and see if we can't put together an aluminum version of this pipe. So here we've got some fabrication going on. This black pipe here is the turbo outlet from the rear turbo. It comes out of the turbo, snakes over the engine, and goes out to the intercooler. It's a little chewed. I'm going to take it and sandblast it and set it in for some powder coating. But I also kind of want to make the tubing a little bit larger diameter, and I want to make it out of aluminum so I can make it nice and anodized and maybe put some Adel Wiggins clamps on it and get rid of the hoses. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using these prefabricated mandrel bend U's, and these ones are from Burn Stainless. If you're smart, you get the factory seconds because you're almost as good and they cost half as much. And all we're doing is just moving this along the pipe, sectioning it in little pie cuts, marking it, putting it in the aluminum saw and slicing it up so that afterwards it can be TIG welded together and make a full pipe. You never get exactly the same shape because the bend radii on this is a little bit different than on here. But there's enough room in there to give you some wiggle room, so it doesn't have to be exactly right. It just has to make it from point A to point B. Had to machine this collar here to accurately represent the turbo outlet, and then this jig here allows me to mock it up and pick up some of the points on there that it uses to mount to various things. Jigs, of course, you always paint bright orange so that you don't mistake them for scrap and wind up using them in some other project. Once this is done, this will be placed on the car, all the segments will be taped together and wiggled around until I got it to the right spot and I'm happy. Once that's done, when the things TIG welded together, the jig will be extended so that little fingers will come off the jig and pick up important parts on this. And then you can go ahead and duplicate that part as many times as you want because you have the jig to make it. So this part here is the adapter for the turbo outlet. We'll just pull that pipe out on the side. So this is a piece that I machined up. The stock turbo uses an O-ring to fit in here, and it uses a little clamp like that to hold it down. So I just made this on the 3-in-1. This section here was used on the lathe, cut down to size, and the tab was actually welded on, and then after the fact, finished machined so that you can't tell that it was ever on there. That weld wasn't particularly pretty, but you know, when you machine it away, a grinder and a can of paint will make a welder what he ain't. Wow. As that cut goes through and you're holding on to the pipe, you can feel the pipe breathe. It expands and contracts as all the stresses that are built up inside here from the mandrel bend are released. That's pretty cool. So there, not exactly the same shape, but pretty close. And there's enough wiggle room in there so that I can rotate the various tape joints on the car and get it to move around a little bit. Or perhaps we need a little bit extra pipe fitting going on. But that gets us in the ballpark to start.
So I really hate hoses and hose clamps, and one of my goals is to replace as many of them on the car as possible with an Adel Wiggins clamp, what you see rendered right here. An Adel Wiggins clamp is an assembly that uses 2 weld ferrules that have grooves in them for O-rings, the parts that you see here in blue. And then there's a slip collar that fits over top of the 2 O-rings, like this. And then those ferrules in that slip ring are secured by the quick release clamp in the center. It's a clamshell. When it's all assembled, it looks like this. It's a nifty little device. The nice thing about the Adel Wiggins clamp is it provides a positive, leak-proof seal that also allows for some misalignment. The 2 ferrules can flex relative to each other and provide some degree of flex within the coupling.
The tubing that I've selected for this project doesn't come in one of the standard Adel Wiggins tubing sizes. It comes in 1 3/4 and 2, and this
That's 1.849. Which is 1 and 55/64. A little shy of 2. So, because we want our fitting to fit better than just trying to tack on a 2-incher, what we'll do is we'll make our own ferrule that fits just over top of this tubing and gives us a nicer fit. It'll also save us a few bucks, because I've got a great big chunk of aluminum bar and a lathe and lots of time. So it's better than that than paying $50 Canadian for every single one of those weld ferrules. I love these Adel Wiggins clamps, but if you buy them like complete, they cost an arm and a friggin' leg. So this is Murphy's Law of 3-in-1 machines. Whatever setup you've got on your machine right now, that's the wrong one for your next job. For all that work, getting it lined up. So this is one of the big problems with one of these. You're always breaking your setup every time you have to change from lathe mode. Well, that's not good. All right, so we're set up. So we get out the Adel Wiggins spec sheet. 99% of engineering is reading the specifications and figuring out how it works. The stuff is basically Lego. The trick is figuring out how they've designed it, and then you make your part so you can fit into their Lego bits. So we look, here's a 2-inch. That has a length across the end of the ferrule of 0.854 maximum, and its diameter is 0.2313 maximum. So now we know how big to cut this on the outside, and we know how long we can make it to get it in there. And it's interesting they give us a maximum specification. So if we pull it down to that max, or maybe just a hair lower, we're good to go. The other thing it calls out here is that it uses, thank you, standard O-rings. So seal size is per MS 33666, and a 2 is a -226 O-ring. By looking up the O-ring specifications, I know now what groove to cut in here to fit the O-ring, because it's a standard. Everything's a standard. Use the Bible, know how it works, and this stuff becomes easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn down this outer diameter to match the specification here. We're then going to bore out the center to match the outer diameter of this pipe. Put a little shoulder in there so it rests up nice and flush. And we'll get the spec for the groove and how big it needs to be to fit the O-ring in the standard spot, and turn down the backside of it to make a ferrule. So we've gone and zero set the DRO, so now we know what 0 is on that last cut. We positively know that that's where we are for 0. When we mic'd it out, it came out to 2.445. The spec says we need to be 2.313 maximum. Subtract the two of them, and that tells us 0.132 is how much we have to take off. Because this is a lathe, though, we're taking off from both sides, that's 0.66 of a cut to get all the way onto target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 30 thou cut, and then remic it, and then another 30 thou cut, and then remic it, and then based on that, we'll see how much of a pass we need to take off. My DROs aren't bad, but I've learned to double check and triple check. Measure once, cut twice, as they say. You can't add metal back on again, at least not easily. So let's get it right.
So that cut mic'd out at 2.376, which means we cut off 69 thou as opposed to cutting off 60 thou, which is interesting because I've checked that DRO before and it's usually pretty accurate. So maybe we get a little bit of buildup on the end of the cutter and that made some difference. So I'm going to turn on the mist coolant and see if that helps us out a little bit. Doing the math again, we now need to pull off 0.63. So we'll do a 20 thou cut to pull off 0.40, and that should leave us with plenty of room for the next cut. You see how I'm being really careful here. You want to sneak up on it. You don't want to try and go all at once. Coolant on. Helps to go the right direction. So that mic'd out at 2.315, so we're 2 thousandths over. I've bumped up the cross slide to reading half a thou, which should get us pretty damn close. So that barely took anything off, which is exactly what we wanted. And we get a nice, smooth surface finish on that, so that's pretty good. Gonna bet that passes. Easy check. Set your micrometer to the value you want. It still doesn't quite make it. Still a little bit over. Okay, crack out the emery paper. Follow that up with some really fine stuff. Let's give her a trust. There we go. Perfect. So now we have to drill out and bore out the inside to fit the outer diameter of the intake pipe we're using. So we spot it with a center drill, and then we'll drill it out and then bore it. we fitted a 1-inch silver and Deming drill. We'll spray on a bunch of this stuff just to keep it happy. Woohoo! Contact. So boring is just turning inside out. We get the boring bar set up, and we're just going to go ahead and take our first cut, measure it, and start moving this out until it's the right size for the pipe that has to fit inside of it. So we've got the inner diameter of here taken out to the inside diameter of the pipe. Now all we need to do is make a 1/4 inch step that's the outside diameter. So instead of boring all the way through like we were, now we're just going to go in a little ways. So there we go. We've got it all bored out. And there's our test pipe. Fits perfectly. So the next step is to cut the O-ring groove. So that line marks how wide the ferrule is in total. Next, I'm going to work out where to put the O-ring itself. So what I've got here is some layout lines. This one here is the maximum width of the ferrule. This is the width of the O-ring groove. And this one here and this one here are the maximum widths of the brackets that hold either side of the O-ring. This width and this width are not critical. This width here absolutely is. The tolerances on an O-ring groove are very, very tight. So what I need to do is cut down this section here and then groove this and then part here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the wall thickness of this down to 1/2 of the current thickness, which seems like just a reasonable arbitrary number given it's going to be welded. Then I'll get my grooving tool and I'll plunge the groove in between these two lines at exactly the right width. It doesn't really matter where it is back and forth here very tightly, but the groove width itself has to be exact. Okay, so we've turned this section down here down to an entirely arbitrary 0.125 thickness, just so when we get the weld on there, it's not too bad. See here, I can stick that on there. So you can see that little step is where the weld will go. So the next bit is to cut the groove. Now this is one of my favorite tools. This is a thin bit grooving tool. This Kaiser tool company makes this particular tool, and they size these bits here to be exactly the size you need for a particular O-ring groove. I unfortunately don't have the right bit for this, but this one here is sized to a 0.133 groove, and I need a 0.187 groove. But because this one's narrower, I can make the groove by plunging in and then moving over a little bit and plunging in again. The tolerance on this is really, really picky though, the depth and the width, so we're going to have to be really careful when we do the cut. Let me just change the lathe over. Okay, that's 120 indicated, and I'm going to bet you that's right on. Okay, we hit our depth target, at least as well as off as I can see. And we're lucky too in that if I got a little bit deep, I could just shave this down a little bit to bring the tolerance back. So we're in good shape there. What we have to do now though is cut the groove wider. So this cutter is 0.141 wide, and we need the groove to be 0.187 wide on the small side. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this 26 thousandths back this way and replunge. So we'll unlock the axis carefully. Five. You know, I'm going to go with that. Nope, screw up the math. Should have been 46, not 26. So I got to pull off another 20 thou. There, that should do it. Parting tool in place. Yeah, it's a little sketchy. But we'll give her a shot. Ah! I love it when a plane comes together. Final step, we face it off. And she's done. So there we go, all done, fresh off the lathe. All blasted off with compressed air, wiped down with acetone, and ready to weld up. Not bad looking. You can see it even kind of looks like the thing on the picture. Now we'll just do a test fit. Bob's your uncle. Perfect fit. Ready to weld on. So there we are. Adel Wiggins clamp ferrule made. All the pipe segments cut and taped together. This we had from before. So all we need to do now is pull the motor, rebuild the motor, reassemble the car, and then check the orientation of these pipes to make sure it actually fits in the space we think it does. And once that's done, weld it up and we're done. So, not a bad morning's work, all things considered. Just want to say thanks to everybody who subscribed. On top of that, if you'd like to see me get rid of my piece of shit 3-in-1 and move up to something a little better, please feel free to visit the Patreon site and maybe consider giving a donation, because all that money is going to go to the CNC Mill Fund. Okay, well, thanks for watching.
Stop it now.
Wonder if anybody would watch people squish things in the... Nah, nobody would want to see that.